Hello, I am Padma Malikarjunan, and I am an Enterprise Support Manager at AWS, and I am based out of Austin, Texas. Welcome to AWS Knowledge Center Live, where we share best practices and troubleshooting tips from AWS support. Joining me today is Rob Egareda and Francesco Penta from AWS Support. Can you give us a quick introduction, Rob and Francesco?
Hi, yes, my name is Rob Higrita, and I'm an enterprise support lead, also located in Austin, Texas, and excited today to present with you all.
Francesco, you are on mute.
And hi, sorry about that. And hi, everyone. My name is Francesco Penta, and obviously I have a mute button problem, but I'm based in Dublin. I'm a principal cloud support engineer for AWS Premium Support, and very excited to be here.
Thank you, Rob and Francesco, for joining us from across time zones. So today we are here to talk about Amazon Workspaces. We will focus on getting started with the service, and we will also focus specifically on best practices for scaling desktops in a Windows environment. Before we get into the details, a quick note to our attendees online. We would love to hear about your Amazon Workspace use cases. Tell us your stories and share your experiences with us. Please post them on the chat window on the right-hand side of your screen so we can discuss it here with Rob and Francesco. And also use the chat window to post any questions you have for us or share your thoughts with us throughout the episode. We look forward to hearing from you. Rob, over to you. Can you walk us through what we are going to be talking about today?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Padma. So today we're going to be talking about Amazon Workspaces and how we can help you work from home easily and securely. So if you're brand new to Amazon Workspaces or haven't heard of the service before, it is our desktop as a service on AWS. And if you're not even familiar with what a desktop as a service is, right, it's going to allow you to get a user experience like your Windows user experience or Linux in this case as well, desktop that you can actually use to do your work on. You may be familiar with, say, our Amazon AppStream offering that does some streaming applications. Well, Workspaces are a streaming desktop platform, essentially. It's going to allow you to access securely anywhere, anytime, from any supported device, your workspace. So you're going to be able to leverage this Amazon Workspace to help you modernize your organization. If you have, say, an existing VDI that's in place that you're using, that you're managing the hardware infrastructure for, all of the actual, virtual desktops that you're presenting to end users, you're managing those as well. Amazon Workspaces is going to allow you to kind of replace that existing infrastructure, support a global workforce without having to have global hardware deployed, and allow you to basically have your users use a BYOD or their bring your own device, so you can support mobile workers really quickly and easily. Another great feature that Amazon Workspaces brings is it's great for project-based work. So if you have, say, a contractor or consultant that's going to come in, they're going to be working on with your organization for a few months, but you want to give them access to, say, all of your infrastructure that you currently use, but you don't manage their actual physical laptop because they're not actually one of your employees. Workspaces is going to give the availability to fast and easily and also securely give them access to your infrastructure through a workspace. This is going to allow you to accelerate the ability to get them on and into helping you with your project. And also it helps with the cleanup after they're done with the project, that you can simply pull away their workspaces and they're no longer able to access your environment any longer. This will help you with your security and compliance teams. Because if you're like the organizations that I've worked for before, security and, just like at Amazon, security is kind of job zero for us. So we make sure that Amazon Workspaces also has a very nice way to secure your environment. It also additionally meets, those different requirements like HIPAA, GDPR, and PCI. So I'm going to pause there real quickly. Kind of just covered a lot in a short amount of time, Padma. So I just wanted to see if there's any questions so far or anything just kind of general for the service that you might have.
Thank you, Rob. No questions on the chat window. Everyone, we look forward to hearing from you. Share us your use cases and your experiences. But before we move forward, Rob, we hear this all the time. Can you tell us the differences between the Amazon EC2 service and Workspaces?
Yeah, so EC2, right, you're responsible for managing. You can go ahead and provision yourself some Windows boxes to remote desktop into. You then have to manage some additional security components. And we're going to go over a lot more in depth kind of how that whole entire workflow. And Francesca's going to take us through kind of how that access works and how we can integrate with different services as we go going through. But basically between EC2 and Workspaces, we handle a lot of the administration and kind of orchestration pieces for you and layer on some additional functionality that isn't there if you were to just self-manage with EC2 or that you'd have to write yourself.
Thank you for that, Rob. Over to you.
All right. So as I was mentioning before, replacing your existing virtual desktop kind of environment that you're providing, you're currently managing the hardware, the desktops themselves, everything that you have. And if you've got users in different locations, you would have to have hardware that was closer to those individual users in order to really make sure they had a like hardware experience if they were sitting at an actual physical infrastructure. The nice thing with Workspaces, it's a globally available footprint. We have locations, as you can see here on the screen, between Northern Virginia to Montreal. Over in Ireland, where Francesca's at, we've got footprint, Singapore, Sydney, Sao Paulo, quite a few different areas where you can have users access their workspace with very low latency to make sure that they can get a good user experience without you having to then deploy hardware in those locations yourself. So we've got a lot of different availability on those locations, and there's a lot of additional functionality and capabilities that are there in Workspaces. So I'm going to turn it over to Francesco, and he's going to kind of go a little bit deeper into some of the Amazon Workspace capabilities that we have built in. Over to you, Francesco.
Thank you, Rob. So before I move into the capabilities, I just wanted to add that it's very important to have a global presence with Workspaces. Normally, since everything is streamed to your client, you get super performance when you are in between 100, so less than 100 milliseconds and 100 and 200 milliseconds as a network requirement. That obviously also depends on the protocol that you're going to use to stream your Workspace client. You have a choice of using the Workspace streaming protocol or PC over IP, which is the industry standard for these kind of applications, and having the Workspaces infrastructure close to your users allows them to get the better experience, and that is almost seamless from the normal desktop experience. The other thing is that Rob was mentioning that was in Ireland as well, close where I am. We in Amazon will talk about these in a bit more detail later. We use Workspaces as well for our infrastructure, and I'm a proud Workspaces user, so that's really useful for me being super close. I really don't have any I cannot distinguish from the local desktop when using it. But let's go over the Workspace capabilities. So the first thing is about the user experience. We'll touch a bit more, but you get clients for Android, iOS devices, Linux, Mac, and Windows, allowing your user to use whatever device they want, giving them a seamless experience. They can move from client to client as well. They can log in from their tablet in the morning, then log in again from their PC, depending on where they are. They can log in on the fly while traveling, for example, but they can access the infrastructure consistently from a number of devices. You get a lot of other features that makes the user experience really smooth and seamless, such as the fact that you can deploy Workspaces images with Office pre-installed, allowing your users to get productive from immediately without having to configure anything on the workspace itself. Neither your administrators will have to do it. Supports for high DPI devices, and most important thing, it integrates with your existing Active Directory or directory environment, and we'll talk in a bit more detail about this later. The other thing is that it's fully secure. Security is, we use the shared responsibility model, so you need to ensure that you're using multi-factor authentication, you need to ensure that you're using strong password, and that you have proper security in the application you're installing in the Workspaces. But there is certification for the industry security standards. You can see a list in here, and we'll post a link in the chat that allow you to basically use this for those jobs and services that will require those security certifications. And for the users using from Europe or that have a business in Europe, this is also fully compliant with the GDPR regulation. From the user experience point of view, as we said, you have a number of clients for all the major operating systems. There is a list of device compatibility for both Android and iOS. For Android, the client is not restricting from running on those devices, although we cannot guarantee that it will work if it's not in the compatibility list. If you're having any issues, you can reach out to the Workspace team to basically ask for support for those specific devices if you're having problems. The other thing that I wanted to add is that Android is supported from version 4.4 and above. Same thing for Windows and Mac OS. You can download the client from the Workspaces main page, and you can instruct your users to do so. The very important thing is that your users do not require an AWS account. So you do not them to create an AWS account. Their account will be specific to Workspaces, and you can reuse credential, or basically use the credential for your existing Active Directory infrastructure or directory services. And you can both leverage a Windows operating system with the Windows 10 desktop experience and the Linux operating systems. Going to the management, which is the thing that interests more the administrators of your company, you can basically integrate with Active Directory, and Rob is an expert on this, so we'll have him talk a bit about how this works with Workspaces. But it fully integrates with group policy objects, so you can define your own rules and policies for the user using Workspaces. And the same thing, if you we will focus a bit more on the Windows ecosystem today, but you can do something similar with the Linux ecosystem as well, using Chef Automate, Puppet Enterprise, or Ansible to provide application deployment and automation into your Linux workspaces as well. Before we move to go and have a look in a bit more detail with Active Directory, Padma, I want to ask if there is any question in the chat.
Thank you, Francesco. Perfect timing. Yes, we do have a question here. Thank you for your question, Mr. Builder 10, and welcome back to the show. So the question here is Workspaces a VPN?
I'll take the question. No, it's not a VPN. The way it works is that it provides you a secure connection to your workspaces. So think of your workspace as your desktop in the cloud. From there, from that desktop, you can get access to your local network or your VPC resources, so allowing you to get those access. But you have to think about it more as a connection to the desktop that's connected then to different networks. So from that connection alone, you will not be able to access other resources, but from the desktop that you're connected to, then you will be able to do it. You can think of it as your screen or your monitor for the connection to that desktop. The other good thing is that we mentioned a few clients that you can download on different devices. It also works with the zero clients. So zero clients are normally devices that are built for the express purposes of connecting to virtual desktops. So that will work as well. There is a series of compatibility things to take in consideration that's available in the documentation, but you can do that as well. So having thin clients connecting to workspaces. Think about it as a resource that you can access from anywhere, and from there, that resource can then access other things.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Francesca, there. Sorry, Kevin.
Okay, go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, that zero client and thin client capability is a really nice part as far as falling into also your security. So as kind of mentioned briefly, that you have some built-in security, but if you want to add additionally onto that, using something like a zero client, they have no local storage capabilities. So when you're leveraging Workspace, it'll basically help you to keep everything in your infrastructure rather than having to worry about someone, say, copying something to the local desktop or their laptop and taking their laptop somewhere and leaving it. Using something like a thin client or a zero client, really, truly a zero client, right, will help with some additional security compliance as well. So thank you, Francesca.
Thank you, Rob. So to add on to that, you also have to think about the different use cases. So the zero client normally will require physical hardware to be in your possession. So normally that will work if you have your corporate office where you don't want to worry about hardware refreshment. So you have those zero clients, and then Workspace will take care of the rest. But the same also works for people that are now working from home. You can use Workspaces to allow your user to use any device. devices. You don't need to worry about getting them the latest laptop or to size the hardware or having hardware refreshment. So when you have to upgrade the hardware for different uses, as well, if something breaks, you do not have to send in a replacement. The user can just use a different device, maybe a tablet they have sitting at home, or even their phone, even though that's not the best experience working on a desktop from a phone screen, but they will still be able to connect, allowing you to get higher productivity. We'll talk a bit more around how you can do images, but the idea is that you can also build those workspaces with all the software your user requires to be productive from day one. So all they need to do is download the software, log in, and they will be presented with a desktop environment where not only they have all the normal productivity software, like for example Microsoft Office, but also software specific to your company. Let's say that you use an internal application to manage orders, or to look at the shipments, anything really your industry does. Your user will already have that accessible without having to install it, which also further reduce your IT cost, because you don't have to have a user to install or troubleshoot why the application is not working on the user laptop, for example. And that's another great advantage that you have with the workspaces. Before we got into this question, so apologies for the parenthesis, we're starting talking about Active Directory. So Rob, I'll give that to you, and want you to explain a bit how this works with Active Directory and how users can leverage their existing infrastructure to basically plug workspaces into their current operations.
Yeah, thanks, Francesco. Yeah, no, this is a great additional kind of thing that you can do with Workspaces. If your existing Microsoft Active Directory is managing, say, your, what you had at your corporate office for desktops, laptops, to push, even small things like wallpapers or, customizations to the way that you have your environment kind of look on your user's computer themselves. You can do kind of the same things with Workspaces, still extending by just using group policy objects. So you can take it. So from my personal experience, what I've used it before is in the security field with doing things with Microsoft Active Directory. We had our CIS benchmarks that we had to push out to our desktops and laptops to try and make sure that we could be as secure as possible. We spent a lot of time building out those CIS benchmark kind of into group policy objects so that we could manage our entire fleet. The nice thing with Workspace is you deploy this into your existing Active Directory, and you can just use those same benchmarks that you have set up there into your Workspace infrastructure without having to reinvent the wheel of redoing everything. So another nice thing is with using Microsoft Active Directory as a tie-in, you can use your existing users, right? So you don't have to create separate users and have multiple usernames and passwords for your users. You can deploy a Workspace and have them log in using the same Windows, username and password that they use for everywhere else in your infrastructure. With leveraging the AWS Managed Active Directory, when you go to deploy a Workspace, you can actually create a user at that time. You can show the existing users in your directory and then map them to that. So you can really manage those workspaces very easily and quickly to be able to use them. And so we show up here, we've got a couple different options with leveraging Active Directory. If you've got an existing Active Directory infrastructure that's on-premise, you can leverage AD Connector. An AD Connector is going to allow you to bridge basic communications from your AWS environment and your workspaces to your Active Directory that's on-premise. We deploy AD Connector in AWS, and then Workspaces can see that. And when you go to actually deploy a workspace, you'll see your directory listed. And we'll kind of show that a little bit here in a demo that you'll be able to see what it's like to just select essentially your domain. Another option is to use our AWS Managed Directory service. And that gives you some additional features, like I mentioned, of being able to, on the fly, create a user as you provision a workspace and see some users in your workspaces existing. Again, these workspaces just get added directly to your domain. So if you're using AD Connector already to, say, add EC2 instances to your existing infrastructure in AD, you can just continue to use that same AD Connector. So kind of just some additional handy features there to leverage that we have, for large infrastructure in place already for Active Directory. Even if you manage, say, AD on EC2 in AWS, you can still just leverage AD Connector to tie into that as well. Francesco's going to cover this more in detail, but as we can see here, we've got kind of the overall network flow of what it takes. I mostly just wanted to highlight here, we've got the AD connector. So this adds to our security that we have as we get kind of a session coming in. Workspaces will handle that connection into AD connector and allow you, this kind of connection here. So I'm going to pause here, turn it over to Francesca. Beforehand, just want to make sure, Padma, we don't have any questions that we've kind of covered into tying into Active Directory and managing with it.
Thank you, Rob. Related to Active Directory specifically, I don't see questions on the chat window, but I do have a question here. You talked about Microsoft Active Directory and Workspaces. So the question is, do you need Microsoft AD to use Workspaces?
That's a really great question. So you do not need Microsoft AD, but you do need a directory service. And so as we get going through the demo that I'll show here in a little bit after we go through this overall flow, we'll show that you can use simple AD, which is actually just backed by Samba. So it will just give you a directory service, but it does not have to be Microsoft AD. All the benefits that I mentioned, though, about using group policy objects and kind of integrating with your existing infrastructure does require Microsoft AD, but that's a great question that you can use just basically simple AD if you don't want to also administer Microsoft AD.
Got it. Thank you. Before we move on, I have one more question here from Pratik0508. Thank you very much for your question, Pratik. Francesco, I think I'm going to ask you for this question. Can you talk about what are some of the skills that we are looking for an AWS Cloud Support Associate role at AWS Support?
Perfect, and thanks for asking the question. So I will say that the most important skills are around troubleshooting. So understanding how operating systems and the networking interact and figuring out where the problems are. Our job as a cloud support associates and engineers is to help our customers get the best out of AWS products and assisting them either when they have questions or they are trying to figure out how something works or if they're having issues or troubles doing something. So the good understanding of the fundamentals is great. So understanding how an operating system works and how networking works, how application works is really, really great. And having a bit of experience with some of the applications run on it, for example, web servers, or if you want to go more in the DevOps side of the automation tools like Chef or Puppet or even products at AWS work is great to have. It's not important to go super deep. You want to have a good understanding of the basis and how things work behind the scenes, but then the rest will come with a bit more experience. There are certain requirements, though, for those jobs. For example, that you can find on the job posting page in terms of having a bachelor degree or completed in the last 6 months, but you can refer to the job description since those can vary from country to country. But beside that, I would say start having a look up and get curious how things work behind the scenes, how an operating system works, and then that will be already half the work done. And figuring out how things works is basically our day-to-day job. So that's definitely a plus in figuring out how all the components interact with each other.
Thank you, Francesco. And thank you again, Pratik, for answering that question. We're always growing and we're always hiring. What I will do is I will post a link to our Amazon Jobs career site on the chat window. So thank you again for asking your question. Now over to you, Rob and Francesco.
Okay, perfect. So I'll take this from here. I wanted to talk a bit about how the network flow works. In these diagrams, Rob was saying we are having the AD connector talking back to our corporate network using either Direct Connect or VPN, but I want to focus a bit more on how the interaction works and how the architecture for Workspaces works. So the first thing is that anytime you're trying to connect, the first thing that you need to do, as with everything, is to authenticate, and this all happens over a secure connection with a TLS termination, where you're talking with the Workspaces authorization and session gateway. Depending on how you configure the Workspaces environment, then we'll talk with the Active Directory connector or with the simple AD, Amazon Simple AWS Simple AD. That will basically ensure that you are who you are and that you have access to those resources. When that happens, then you will connect to the streaming gateway, and that's where you will get a secure connection to the Workspaces environment. The Workspaces resources are sitting in a managed VPC that's not accessible from your user directly. This, again, happens over the streaming gateway, but they do have a network interface attached in a VPC of your choosing. So what this means is that once you're connected, that workspace resource will have access to VPC, and depending on what you have in that VPC, how you configure your network ACL and routing tables, you'll also be able to communicate with your corporate data center if you have one connected, or if you are native in AWS, you could get access to other resources in the VPC depending on your routing table and how you configure the rest of the communication. This is particularly important because your users are not limited to accessing a desktop with internet access, and that's it. They can get so you can use this, as Rob was saying, for a collaborative environment where you can give access to a database or a production server or to anything really that clients need to access in a secure way. You don't need to worry about virus on the client connecting to your database or malware or anything really, because you know that Workspace is secured by you, it's only running the applications you need, and that there's nothing that can happen over the connectivity. Another great way when using the streaming gateway is that it also supports for remote USB devices. You can use both network and USB printers. So it does support an array of things that will not be possible without physically plugging it in, but that's what the PC over IP protocol allows you to do. You can also use the Workspace streaming protocol if you wish. So diagram is not showing that because we want to focus a bit more on PC over IP, but there's a few good improvements that you can have while using the Workspace streaming protocol, such as bidirectional video and so on. So I think that the best thing to show how it works, rather than talking over a diagram, is to actually show a demo that Rob has prepared for us. So I will give back to Rob for the demo, and then we can discuss a bit more about the service over it.
Great, yeah, thanks, Francesco. So yeah, we're going to take a look overall at how to get started with your Amazon Workspace usage, right? So I'm going to jump over to a little demo here that's going to help you just kind of get launched and get going with your Amazon Workspace environment. So when you come to the actual Workspaces, you get the kind of welcome screen, and you launch into and you get presented initially with this Get Started with Amazon Workspaces. This is going to give you two options, and so you can leverage the quick setup, and that quick setup is going to take care of provisioning a directory for you, creating your workspace, and creating your VPC and everything that you use for Amazon Workspaces. So if you want to quickly kind of just test out Amazon Workspaces without, say, integrating into your existing Active Directory, you're kind of just doing a POC, the quick setup's a nice way to get in there because it will go ahead and provision directory for you. It's simple AD that it provisions during that portion. So you just get the basic access to a user directory that you can then store all your users and kind of spin up more workspaces in after you get that quick setup kind of done. If you had, say, an existing AD connector deployed, or you're already using our managed directory services out there already, you can go into advanced setup and you'd be able to leverage that to, say, target your Active Directory environment you already have, provision into, say, a specific VPC that you want to use for your networking. Say, like Francesco was saying, you have a VPC setup that has kind of the routing in place to give access to your RDS databases or your file servers and stuff ready, and you're like, it's just going to be easier for me to put it in there. And you know that, you can use the advanced setup then as well to kind of deploy into your existing infrastructure. Quickly, I'm going to go through kind of running what the quick setup looks like. If we click on quick setup, we get set into this Get Started with Amazon Workspaces screen. From here, you're presented with a number of different options. As we mentioned briefly, you can use Amazon Linux 2 as a workspace, and this is a full GUI, so you'll get an actual presentation of a desktop in Linux to be able to use for your users. So if you have some that are just really comfortable with using Linux, you can do that. But we have a variety of different what we call bundles, and those bundles you can choose between Linux and Windows. As you can also see, we have availability to choose a variety of different number of vCPUs. We've got some additional items like the amount of memory that's be able to be provisioned within there. So we can see we've got from 1 CPU and 2 gig of memory all the way up to 16 vCPU and 122 gigabytes of memory. We've also got free tier eligible workspaces. So again, if you're going through and you're just kind of trying to run a POC and you want to see, is this going to work without spending a lot? You can quickly take advantage of one of the free tier eligible bundles and be able to kind of launch and use your initial kind of deployment of workspaces for testing. Quite a variety of different ones here between Graphics Pro, Office 2016 bundled in, like Francesco was mentioning. So if your users are typically used to using Microsoft Office, they can get that just kind of built in without you having to deploy afterwards or worry about licensing for those. So kind of a lot of different things here. So I'll kind of just see if there's any questions for anyone.
I have a question for you, Rob. So you obviously have a combination of virtual CPUs, space. Can you expand a bit more? So what should I choose when I want to do something? And can I change it after I've chosen it?
Yeah, so that's a great question, because you can. So if say you have a user that is basically just going to be browsing the web, accessing some files to do some word processing, you can choose one of the kind of value bundles and say, give them access to that 1 CPU, 2 GB of memory, or 2 CPU and 4 GB of memory under the free tier, right? And kind of get your basic users up and running. But as you see, we have those additional kind of bundles that have, say, we've got the Graphics Pro that's in there, right? Graphics Pro bundles are going to give you a lot more compute power plus additional memory. That's going to be for those users that, say, even need to be able to do CAD processing, right? So they want to be able to do graphics actually on their workspace. By being able to select one of these Graphics Pro, even as we were mentioning before, you can take kind of the approach with your contractor. Say you've got someone, or even just a short-term project where you're going to be doing some architecture design, you want to have a full CAD experience for a user, but you only need it for 2 months for the project. Historically, you may have to provision or purchase actually physical hardware that would support that. And then after your project is done for 2 months, now you've just kind of got your additional hardware sitting around that maybe isn't necessarily used to its full extent. With Workspaces, you could say, take a user, start them off with Graphics Pro for that 2-month project, and continue to retain their user data after the fact and migrate them to a different bundle, like back to standard, with the 2 vCPU and 4 GB of memory. So there's a lot of additional flexibility that you can do with these, where you couldn't necessarily do with, say, buying a physical piece of hardware for your end users. All right, Padma, is there any questions at all that we can cover beyond that? Just want to make sure we're not missing anything.
Thank you, Rob and Francesco. Yes, we do have a couple of questions. This question is related to Active Directory on-prem. Rob, I think this might be for you. So the question is for, thank you, Mayor1, for your question. For Active Directory, does it support both the on-prem as well as other cloud providers' Active Directory services?
So you would just have to have access to your AD service, right, at all. So you should be able to use, if I remember correctly, and I'm sorry I don't have 100%, I can definitely take a look here as we're going through some of this other information, or Francesca, if you know off the top of your head, but it's basically just looking for a directory service itself. So you'd be able to kind of tie into any Microsoft Active Directory. I think Francesca just posted a link here, right? Yeah, Azure AD. Thanks, Francesco. Appreciate that. Didn't have to wait for it.
No, but yeah, you can do it. There's a guide on how to do that. But as long as it's an Active Directory environment that you can Workspaces can connect to, then there's no problem in doing that, and it will work just as fine.
Right.
Got it. Thank you. The next question is from Mr. Builder 10. Thank you again for your question. Can you expand a little bit more on security? So specifically, you talked a little bit about security, and you said you don't have to worry about malware. Can you expand a little bit more about it?
Absolutely. And thanks for the question. Let me be a bit more clear here. You always have to worry about malware, right? So you always want to have a strong security posture for your user. What I meant is that since the users are not connecting using their own devices, and since you have control using either group policies or having restrictions on the bundles that, so basically denying your user from installing software and only be able to use the software they're using, Workspaces Workspaces is a more secure environment that will be having the user connect directly, I don't know, with a client VPN into your entire infrastructure, because you're managing the workspaces. You're determining what can be installed. You can have control over anti-malware, doing scanning. You can reimagine the workspace, or you can rebuild it whenever you want if you think there's been a security incident. So you have full control of what's going on over the workspace environment that the user is using. So you don't have to worry about your user installing software they should not, and so on. Obviously, this is similar to giving managed devices to your user, with the advantage, though, that you're not giving a managed device, you're giving them access to the device in the cloud. So that's why it becomes a bit more secure than your normal environment, and you can trust a bit more with connection from the workspace itself to either sensitive data or applications or production environments inside your VPC. It makes just for a far better security posture and solution than having the user use their own hardware or devices or software to connect to those networks.
Thank you. And one last question here before we go, again from Manur Mayer 1. Thank you for your question. This is about HIPAA compliance for workspaces. I know you touched on this topic a little bit, Rob. So I think to paraphrase the question, are we HIPAA compliant automatically by using workspaces? Can you expand a little bit on that?
Yes. So the answer is that the service itself is compliant, and it has compliance for other certifications that are reviewed independently by third-party audits. So we're just not saying it's compliant because we say so. We get through a process of certification, and you can find more information on the product page and on the documentation. Everything also depends on the use you're making out of it. So I'll post a couple of links regarding the compliance, and also the administrator guide that tells you what's in scope and what are the use cases that are covered by this compliance. So you can get a bit more information. It's a complex topic, but there's more explanation there. But the servicing by itself is compliant depending on the data use, that the use of data and the use of the service that you're making out of it.
Got it. Perfect. I do have one more question. Thank you, Gallo Trader, for your question. Can you give a use case for this service, or one of the best use cases you have seen for using Amazon Workspaces?
Yes, I can take that one, Francesco. So in my own past experience, I worked for a company that basically did processing for other organizations. So they did a lot of back office type work for them. So rather than having to necessarily put those, basically essentially like I don't call it necessarily a call center, but a business back office center that would access your infrastructure without having to then in those different locations deploy hardware for them. We just basically provided access to our users to workspaces that then had all the access they needed. That allowed us to easily, for our own purposes, reuse the same physical hardware for multiple different clients. And that continued to give them the separation of security, because those users were never actually accessing multiple clients' environments, because they used the workspace to then actually access that. So it helped us to isolate users to specific environments, quickly be able to leverage the same hardware for more users without having to, really set up complex security around those physical assets. Allowed us to then be able to quickly and easily, when we needed to, in case of any incidents, remotely relocate to another site. So we actually had an instance where we lost internet at our site. And so if we lost internet completely at that site, luckily we had an actual other office that wasn't too far away, our users could easily just drive across town, sit down at those other sites and work, or just be able to log into those workspaces from wherever. So that was kind of one of our use cases where it was really a large help that we had that, because otherwise, if you lost internet at your local site, it's not very easy to take those secure desktops and then completely relocate those to another, especially if you got other workforce in that location too. So that's just one situation.
That's a good use case. I'm going to post a few more links to case studies that we have here. I think we have an internal Amazon study, as well as Sorry, Francesco, did you want to add something?
Yeah, this is something that I wanted to share. So thanks, Padma, for reminding me. The one of the great use cases in these days with the current things that are happening in the world is when you have workers starting remotely. You don't have to ship them a laptop. You don't have to really provision hardware for them. Basically, the way it works is that you can give them a link to download the software, and they are ready to work without having to wait for shipments on. And I do have a personal story. My laptop was out of commission for a few days because I had a problem with the actual physical laptop, and I kept working on Workspaces without having any downtime, just because I could connect from my personal computer using Workspaces, since that's a secure environment. Amazon is a customer of Workspaces as well, and we do have a lot of people working using Workspaces either exclusively or as a companion to their actual hardware being provided. And the, Padma, in the link that Padma posted, there is the case study that Amazon did on how we're using Workspace and how that allows us to be faster and be more efficient with that use, along with the use cases from a lot of different customers that are fully embraced the use of Workspaces. And you can see there how everyone is using it slightly different, but still allowing them to be more productive and efficient when dealing with their clients.
Got it. Thank you, Francesco. So over to you, Rob. I think we have about 10 or so minutes here. Show us the rest of the demo.
Okay. So yeah, there's a lot that you can go through with the different bundles, right? A lot of different options there, including our GPU powered one. So if you actually need physical GPU power, you can select a bundle that has that as well. I think we have some links to share kind of information around the GPU availability that's fairly new within Workspaces. Really helps with those graphics use cases. As we continue to kind of look through deployment through that quick start, as we can see at the bottom here, we've got entries for, say, username, first name, last name, and email, and then the bundle that we're going to choose. So if we click the box above, it automatically populates the bundle below, but you could select from here as well. And as you can see, you've got the option to kind of create additional users and do more with this all in one. Probably one key item that's really helpful to mention as well is you don't have to use the GUI for all of this provisioning. You can use our APIs that are available to be able to automate this. So as you had new fleet kind of come in of users, you can provision users here as well. So we just populate basically the username, their first name, last name, email, and a bundle, and click continue, and we get a workspace. I went ahead and provisioned a workspace ahead of time because I didn't want you to have to sit and wait. It takes about 20 minutes for a workspace to build because it has to install the OS, get everything set up, integrate into your directory service and such. So we basically have one that's already launched. We can see the status is available, and we can expand and kind of see a little bit more information. So based on what we kind of populated previously, we've got the username field, we've got the email that was used for it, we've got the client's links. This is for you as an administrator. Say if you wanted to craft your own individual email for them, you get your registration code. That registration code is what you're actually going to use to connect into your workspace itself. And then we can see here that we've got things like connection state, user last active, last state check, and such. Since no one's actually connected to this workspace yet, there's nothing that's actually there. But as an administrator, you'd be able to kind of come in and see when that actual workspace has been used. One other kind of key feature here that we want to highlight, and we'll go a little bit more later on into this, is the running mode. As you can see on the screen, the running mode is set to auto stop, and that's a really handy feature because when you have a user that, say, isn't actually using their workspace anymore, you can save on the pricing because it's on demand by having it auto stop. And that way you're not billed for a workspace while it's not actually being used. And you can change that auto stop time to, as you can see right now, it's set to an hour. You could set that to 2 hours so that, say, your end user could go to lunch and come back and not have to wait for their workspace to start back up. Because that can take about a minute, minute and a half in order for a workspace to reboot, get logged back in and be ready for you to actually use again. But the auto stop mechanism is very handy in helping you save costs while you're actually using your Workspace's environment. From the user side, when you provision this, you put in their email address and you gave them, you set their kind of what their username was going to be according to their email address and such. So if you wanted to, you can re-invite the user. You could come in here and modify this as your own. And you can do a lot of different things. But from the user side itself, they're going to get an email that's going to contain basically that they have a workspace provision to them. So that's some nice additional automation that's going to be kind of built in that you don't have to worry about doing. So where I mentioned you've got the client link, you've got the registration code, you could compose your own email, but you really don't have to. We take care of that automation process for you to alert the user that, hey, your workspace is ready to use, and they get an email that's like this. It's just going to come from a typical, no reply at, but it's going to give them a link to their workspace where they can go ahead and set their password to access this. Again, if you were tied in and using your actual Active Directory environment, you wouldn't have to necessarily set the password. But since we use the quick start, this is using Simple AD, so it wants them to set their username and password. It will provide them their registration code that they'll actually use to access their workspace, as well as their username, because if it's brand new and they're not tied into existing Active Directory, right, they would probably like to know what their actual username is. They'll click on the link and they will get presented to this screen here, in which case they can put in their new password and confirm their password and then update that. Once they've done that, they have the availability then to go ahead and jump over and use one of the number of clients that we have available. So Francesco mentioned we've got Android, iOS, Windows, Mac, various clients. We've also got a web client that you can use through different versions of your OS to be able to log in without even have to install a client on your personal machine, say if you're using your laptop, and be able to actually still get access to your workspace itself. That link that's provided in the email will take them here where they can choose whichever version of OS that they have. So if they have Mac OS or a Fire tablet, I know personally myself on my iPad, I like to take my iPad some places more than my laptop because it's easier. So if I'm going on vacation, I don't have to worry about taking my work laptop. I can take my iPad that has a little built-in Bluetooth keyboard and easily be able to log into my workspace to continue working. So Francesco's mentioning about how his work laptop, he had to use his personal computer to do that. I do it just because if I'm going on vacation, sometimes I want to disconnect, but still be able to potentially do stuff. So very handy to have these different variety of OSs that you can connect into. So once they've downloaded a client, depending on whatever OS version they have, they're going to take this information they provided in an email that we see here and be able to connect. And so after they connect, as you can see, you'll see in the administration side that they're connected, right? Or that they have connected. So we can see this user has last been active on December 7th. It's a standard Windows 10 box they're using. And then from their side, they basically just put in this registration code and click register. And now they're ready to put in that username and the password that they just set to be able to then access their Amazon workspace. So quickly, easily, they can use here, which is username and password. Francesco mentioned we can layer on additional security using multi-factor authentication, so you can make it a little bit more secure. And as we can see here, we get connected into an Amazon workspace, and we get our traditional kind of GUI interface that we have into Windows. From here, we have access, so we see we've got the install the Amazon WorkDocs, so we can use WorkDocs with our workspaces if we want to. One key thing I also like to mention, and always like to tell customers when they look at workspaces, and I've gotten asked myself, is this actually Windows 10 that's running? And it's actually Windows Server 2016 that runs with the Windows 10 user experience on top. So that is something to keep in mind as you're building out things for your environment. If you have specific use case where it absolutely has to be Windows 10, we do have options to be able to bring your own licensing. And that would allow you to then use a license that you previously purchased for Windows 10 to actually get a full-fledged Windows 10 desktop that's not Server 2016 with the user experience on top of it. So just wanted to highlight that. But I'm going to pause to see if there's any questions that we have, either from Francesco or from the crowd, Padma. So just take a break there.
Sure. A question here from L. Crone. The question is, does this service provide for supporting the shared pool use case? That is, having a pool of desktops available for users, or is this service intended for named users?
Yeah.
You can take that one, Francesco.
Oh, perfect. So no, Workspaces is assigned to a single user, and it cannot be shared to multiple users. This is also because of security consideration, and you want to have the user being able to only access the data present there. So there is no option at the moment to have a single workspace being shared across users, unless they're sharing credentials, which is something that we will not recommend in any given case, and they should not do in the first place. So the idea is that you have those options that Rob mentioned, like stopping, having the auto stop for workspaces, which will help you save money as well. There is a monthly cost associated when you're paying by the hour, but that's quite small and also depends on the size of the workspaces that you're provisioning. But ideally, you still want to have these options. And if your users are using the workspaces infrequently, you can have the auto stop. Everything is handled by the workspaces services. So when there's a certain amount of inactivity and you can configure how much this is, the workspace will stop automatically, saving costs because you're paying hourly for the workspaces when it's running. And when the user tries to reconnect, the client and the workspace service will detect that, will start the workspaces back up, and they will be able to connect just fine. So definitely you can use these in a hybrid way where certain users might have workspace allocated all the time, others will just get some workspaces assigned to them started when they need it.
Got it. Thank you. Over to you, Rob. Anything else you want to cover today for the demo?
Yeah, so primarily, as we went through the quick start here, right, we saw some different things where we just kind of had it automatically provision and leverage some of the simple AD portions of things. One thing we can do, like you mentioned, is launch into our existing Active Directory environments. So real quickly here, I'm going to try and see if we can jump into this and see what it looks like to actually be able to select and choose from a directory that exists. But everything that Francesca covered is really great as far as that auto stop feature, helping you reduce cost by those items. And we're going to cover just a little bit more here real quickly. It's kind of stuck, so we can jump into kind of the next bit of information here and go over kind of just the additional benefits that we have. So I'm going to go back here and share just some additional benefits Francesco wanted to cover as far as the Amazon Workspace, and we can kind of cover these together.
Absolutely. Thanks, Rob. So we talked about already the running mode. So you can configure your workspaces to be running all the time or be running and be stopped automatically when they are idle. There are use cases, again, when you might want to have them available and immediately ready for your users. But if your users are not using these as their primary workstation, it might make sense to just save costs when they're not using it. As with every other AWS service, it's fully integrated with CloudWatch for monitoring, where you can get different metrics regarding utilization and performances of the workspaces, and allows you to have different options regarding the way you're provisioning the both the application. We talked this already when you're having those bundles and images created with the user to increase productivity, but also you can have backups of the data. So when you are provisioning a workspace, there will be a partition that's or a drive in the case of Windows that's dedicated to the actual user data, and they can use that to take backups and make the data secure as well. So again, if the user loses a laptop, then they most likely lost all the data that's in it. But when they're using workspaces, that's no longer an issue because first, it's very difficult to lose something that's in the cloud, and second, the data can be regularly backed up, and you can use your own backup procedures to get the data securely. Some other things, since it integrates with WorkDocs, and you can use other products like that for productivity. Your users can use that as a collaboration and sharing platform without the need of having additional infrastructure built. But if you already have your own infrastructure built, such as file sharing or SharePoint sites, these integrates natively and seamlessly, and it will be like for a user like using the corporate laptop with your own infrastructure. And that's everything from my side. Padma, is there any other question from the audience?
No, no further questions from the audience. I think thank you for answering all the questions here, and thank you for all the great questions, everybody. We really enjoyed responding to those questions. But if there was anything that we were unable to answer today, You can post your questions on forums.aws.amazon.com. So we looked at Amazon Workspaces today, getting started with the service and the best practices for scaling the services in a Windows environment. Email us any feedback, what you like about the show, and what else you would like to see on this show. Email us at kc-live@amazon.com. Thank you for joining us today at AWS Knowledge Center Live, and happy cloud computing.
Thank you very much. Happy cloud computing.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone. Appreciate it.